Okay, great. And I'm starting the webinar in 5 seconds.
Hello to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are connected from across the world. And welcome to this webinar on the MAPS assessment of South Africa. We are thrilled to have you here today because this is really an endeavor. This assessment shows the collaboration among several international organizations with government authorities in South Africa. I invite everybody to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function that you will see on the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end, so feel free at any point to start formulating your questions, and we expect to have some time to take them live at the end. I should also, just before giving the floor to Paulo first, I should remind you that as we usually do for our webinars, this webinar is being recorded and we will publish the recording of this webinar on the MAPS website as soon as the event is over. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Paulo Magina, Head of the Infrastructure and Public Procurement Division at the OECD, to provide some opening remarks for this event. Paulo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolas, and welcome to the launch event of the MAP South Africa report. For us, it's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to share with you the findings, recommendations, insights from this thorough assessment of one of the G20 countries and one of the largest economies and the largest in Africa, for sure. So as you know, the MAPS is the universal tool for assessing procurement systems. And this is a tool that has been used in more than 40 countries now. And in fact, this is precisely the 40th country to be completed the assessment of South Africa. Procurement represents 13% of GDP in OECD countries. In South Africa, it goes to 15% of GDP, and it's the most important tool a government can use to impact the economy and to ensure the well-being of citizens and to ensure that public services are delivered in a way that is efficient and sustainable. And this is precisely what is demonstrated in the assessment report that we have concluded. And I would like to start by thanking, of course, the government of South Africa and the National Treasury for their bravery and openness to allow us to look at their procurement system, a system that has been under scrutiny for the past few years, a system that has proven to be not fit for purpose yet, and a system that the government knows it needs improvement. And for that reason, it invited the OECD together with other partners to look at the procurement system by using the MAPS methodology. And this is, as Nicolas said, the result of a large collaboration among several international organizations. And I would like also to thank the African Development Bank and the World Bank for partnering with the OECD to carry this MAPS assessment, and for bringing their expertise and knowledge in applying the MAPS tool throughout the world, as well as a unique opportunity to use this assessment tool in a country that is willing to change and improve their system, and that is the case of South Africa. And since we coordinated the revision process of the MAPS methodology between 2015 and 2018, since then, as I said, the MAPS has been used throughout the world in all continents. And the MAPS South Africa is an example of this willingness to use a universal tool that is able to produce results and to showcase the things that are going well and the things that can be improved in a particular system. But the journey is not ending here. In fact, the journey is just starting here. You will see throughout this webinar and this presentation that the things that we have identified, the recommendations that we are giving, are only the initial point for the government to improve. So it's important that the stakeholders, the people at large, the people that are part of the procurement ecosystem in South Africa, both from the government side, but also from the private sector side, from civil society, from academia, understand the value of this assessment, but are also able to take the results of this assessment and implement them. And I believe this is also something that will be demonstrated during this presentation, that you will see how South Africa is planning to deal with the implementation of the recommendations from this assessment. And of course, on my behalf, on behalf of the OECD, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of the other partners, we are willing to continue supporting South Africa in this endeavor and help the country improving their public procurement system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulo. Then let's move to Ashraf Ayad. Ashraf is procurement manager at the African Development Bank. Ashraf, the floor is yours for these opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Nicholas, and good day to you all. I think people are connected from all around the world. It's a pleasure for me to say a few words on behalf of the African Development Bank. I would like to start by congratulating the government of South Africa, and in particular the National Treasury, the Office of the Director General, the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, for engaging with the bank and the rest of the partners on this important exercise, and for, of course, providing the leadership, guidance, and cooperation throughout the process. I must also mention that we were highly privileged to partner with the OECD and the World Bank during this assessment. This event is an important opportunity for the team to present their findings, as our objective has always been to produce an assessment that is accurate, that is as accurate as possible in capturing the status of the public procurement system in South Africa and identify areas where improvements may be required. But having said that, we need to remember that MAPS is only a diagnostic tool that is designed to comprehensively assess the system. So it is important to say that presenting these shortfalls is not aimed at criticizing the system, but rather to highlight areas where improvement can be made in order for the country to reap the fruits of a well-functioning procurement system. As much, maybe this was mentioned by Paulo, as much as undergoing this assessment is important, but it is only the beginning. And what will make this effort to really pay off is the follow-through on the findings by implementing the agreed upon recommendations resulting from this exercise. And of course, the African Development Bank senior management support to its regional member countries in the modernization and reform of their public procurement systems is unwavering. And for sure, we are ready to continue our fruitful engagement with the government and to discuss and identify areas of collaboration and explore means where the bank can provide support. Let me conclude by thanking the MAP Secretariat for their efforts in supporting this exercise, and in particular for coordinating the quality control process for this assessment. I wish you all a fruitful and successful deliberations, and I thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. And finally, organizations, and this includes also the World Bank. So I would like to invite now Elmas Arizoi, Procurement Manager at the World Bank, to provide some opening remarks for this webinar. Elmas, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the World Bank. And I'd like to congratulate National Treasury and Office of the Chief Procurement Officer for successful completion of the MAPS assessment. And I'd like to congratulate the team for launch of assessment report today. And also I'd like to thank all stakeholders who contributed to this assessment. It was a great pleasure and wonderful experience to work with National Treasury, of course, OECD, African Development Bank, and within our team. So today, I'd like to emphasize 2 points with regard to role of public procurement. the public procurement is so important for the development of the country, and I'd like to share a few ideas. As indicated in the assessment report, annual public procurement is about 15% of the GDP in South Africa. And even a small percentage of improvement based on modernizing and optimizing the public procurement system can generate millions of dollars worth of savings, which can be used for the development of the country. And public procurement can also help to focus more on value for money. Government being the largest single purchaser, it can definitely make an impact on sustainable outcomes for sustainable development of the country and implement its sustainable development objectives. And therefore, it's very timely, given that a new public procurement law is recently enacted in South Africa, implementing the law, bringing the recommendations of this assessment into implementation, such as end-to-end e-procurement system, professionalization, sustainable procurement. All these tools will really help to bring a stronger value for money for the public procurement in the country. At the same time, public procurement is very vulnerable, considering the very large amount of public money spent. It also brings risk of fraud and corruption. Not very long time ago, we have seen the Zondo report, which shed some light on the corruption in public procurement in South Africa. So transparency and fairness in using public resources are extremely important to develop a very credible public procurement system so that the stakeholders, including the taxpayers, will have confidence in the system, will have trust in the system. And when I say stakeholders, it's very important to gain the trust and confidence of the business community, which is very important, which are playing a very important role in public procurement in every country. So a good public procurement system needs a very professional workforce, effective monitoring and control mechanisms, and also systems supporting addressing fraud and corruption related vulnerabilities. So this assessment report provides very important recommendations to address these vulnerabilities and also to strengthen the power of public procurement in the country to support sustainable development in the country. The World Bank, together with the OECD, African Development Bank, and other development partners, is already confirmed by their speakers before me. We confirm our support, continued support to government of South Africa, and we will be working with you in implementation of these recommendations. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Elmas. And now I would like to invite, sorry for this. I would like to invite the South African Treasury and the Director General at the, sorry, I missed the slide here, but the Director of the South African National Treasury, Dr. Duncan Pieterse, to provide his opening remarks before going and hearing from the assessors about the findings and recommendations of the MAPS assessment. So Dr. Pieterse, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicholas, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear us clearly. I'm here with the rest of the Treasury team that have been engaged closely in this process. They have joined me here today. And let me start just by sharing the sentiments of some of the other speakers and indicate that this event for us marks a very important moment since, as you've indicated, we are joining 39 other countries whose public procurement systems have also been evaluated using this MAPS international standard and universal tool. The assessment of the national procurement system was initiated by the National Treasury in 2023, and the aim really was to identify how the public procurement system can generate greater value for money for government, become more transparent, and drive accountability. The MAPS tool also allows for benchmarking of our procurement system against international best practices and uses the outcomes to ensure that we can improve and strengthen our system in South Africa. We are thankful to the many stakeholders that participated in the assessment, including our development partners, organs of state, civil society, non-governmental organizations, and others. And the broad participation of stakeholders bodes very well for the work that lies ahead to ensure that we can align our procurement system with international best practice. The improvements in our procurement system is at the core of enabling a public sector that can deliver services economically, effectively, and efficiently. Unfortunately, and this is part of what has been pointed out in the report, the current system is fraught with inefficiencies that make it uneconomical, cumbersome, and open to abuse. The MAPS assessment will certainly contribute to our efforts to reform and modernize the public procurement system. The findings and recommendations will specifically be considered in the development of the regulations to the Public Procurement Act, as also confirmed by the Minister of Finance in his recent medium-term budget policy statement. Now that the Public Procurement Act has been assented into law, this will ensure that we address some of the current procurement challenges. For example, the single national regulatory framework for procurement sets a stage for better integration of public sector procurement. However, we acknowledge that the Act on its own is insufficient to resolve our procurement challenges. The assessment, while acknowledging the significant advancements brought about by the Act, identifies several gaps that we need to respond to. These gaps are broad-based, covering legal and institutional frameworks, operations, and various integrity areas. And these gaps that have been identified largely confirm what the National Treasury has known and what civil society organizations and others have been raising and reporting, and what the public has been experiencing. This evidence-based process therefore provides South Africa with an independent insights to ensure that we are able to strengthen our procurement system. It is therefore our collective commitment to earnestly consider the report, socialize it within government, and develop a roadmap to implement the recommendations. Later in the session, Mendo, our Chief Procurement Officer in the National Treasury, will outline the process of advancing the recommendations from the assessment. We are, of course, grateful to the development partners who heeded our call for collaboration in undertaking the assessment and have walked the journey with us. To Paulo and the entire OECD team, Almas at the World Bank and Ashraf and the African Development Bank teams, we sincerely thank you. Your steer and commitment have made the assessment report more valuable given the robustness of the findings and the concrete recommendations. As we embark on the next phase of this project by implementing the recommendations, we would like to ensure that we can count on your support. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Dr. Pieterse. Sorry for the mistake in the slide, but now I think we have it all ready to hear from the assessing teams of these three institutions that collaborated with the South African government. And I would like first to invite Mr. Amilcar Bilale, Regional Procurement Coordinator at the African Development Bank, to speak about the findings and recommendations related to Pillar 1 of this assessment. Let me go ahead, Amilcar.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We will start this presentation with a brief recap of the MAPS methodology. Many of you know and have seen this slide countless times. It's just a general reminder that the MAPS is an international tool for assessing procurement systems, applying detailed criteria, but most importantly, assessing how the procurement is operating in practice. The assessment is based on several sources, including sampled files and engagements with stakeholders through surveys and also through direct discussions. Today, we are reporting to you on the output of this process. This picture outlines both the final report and this presentation. The methodology applies a wide range of assessment criteria, both qualitative and quantitative, across 4 pillars of the assessment, namely the legal, the institutional, the operational, and also the integrity pillar. This is an overview of the countries where the assessment have been completed or are currently ongoing, highlighting the universal nature of this tool. This slide maps the stakeholders involved in the assessment, which emphasize the collaborative nature of the assessment. We will now proceed with the presentation of the main findings and recommendations across all the 4 pillars. The timing of the assessment means that it coincided with final stages of the process leading to the adoption of the new Public Procurement Act in July 2024. The MAPS assessment is based on the legal framework which was in place at April 2024, excluding the local government sphere. The new Procurement Act was not enforced at the date, and so it's not the subject of the main assessment report. The team felt, however, that it was important to acknowledge the recent developments, and so we prepared a specific annex to the main report. The annex notes whether and to what extent the new Public Procurement Act, when it comes into force, will address the recommendations for changes to the legal framework which we made in the main report. This annex can also serve as an important tool to address some shortcomings through the implementing regulations currently being prepared. Today, we are focusing on 3 key areas identified for improvement. There is a lot more in the full report, which sets out 30+ gaps and recommendations related to the legal, regulatory, and policy framework. Our general findings should not come as a surprise to you. We had concerns about the extensive, complex, and fragmented legal and regulatory framework, which is not always up to date and or well aligned with other pieces of legislation. This raised significant potential for lack of certainty and different interpretations and application of the framework on the day-to-day basis, which is likely to have negative consequences. We also noted that at level of procurement operations, there are in effect 2 parallel systems, with contracts falling within CIBD regime being subject to more rigorous and prescriptive requirements. Our key finding presented today is that our first key finding presented today is that whilst open competitive bidding is regarded as a default method above threshold procurement, there is no single clear and unambiguous list of procurement methods with clear conditions or standard for use specified. In this context, we also note reference to availability of other means for procurement. The lack of a well-defined list of available procurement methods and conditions or standards for use reduces the overall clarity and coherence of the system, which may have a negative impact on the effectiveness of the system for both procuring entities and bidders. It's well-established standard international practice to include a list of procurement methods in the legislation, and we have recommended that such list is placed in a high-level legal instrument to ensure stability and consistency. The list can be of general application, with lower-level instruments used to regulate the methods and conditions at more detailed level, including accommodate specific sector requirements. The second finding we are presenting concerns the restricted supply list. Inclusion on this list can have grave consequences for a supplier who may be debarred from doing business with the government. Is it thus important to ensure that the process leading to listing is applied in a consistent manner and free from bias? We are concerned that high levels of local discretion in this context raises the risk of inconsistency and biases. We have therefore recommended a thorough review of the process and outcomes to explore the efficacy of the system and to identify remedial measures. The third and final finding under Pillar 1 relates to cross-cutting issue of sustainable procurement. For the purpose of MAPS assessment, sustainable procurement concerns economic, social, and economic issues, economic, social, and environmental issues. Sustainable procurement transcends traditional procurement's focus on compliance with rules and regulations. Instead, it can serve as a strategic driver for achieving national development goals. It is a complex task to ensure effective embedding of all aspects of sustainability in public procurement in a coherent manner and to apply it in all spheres of government. An important step, which we recommended in the report, is the preparation of a single consolidated sustainable public procurement policy or strategy, providing a strategic guidance during the implementation. A critical assessment of the effectiveness of current measures should inform the preparation process. The strategy must be supported by meaningful and detailed implementation plan or roadmaps, including resource allocation and capacity building initiatives. I'll now hand over to Matthew, who will guide us through the Pillar 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Amilcar, and good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, I would like to present the findings and the recommendation, the main recommendation which fall under Pillar 2, which looks at the institutional framework in the country. And for that, I was aiming to change the slide. Yeah. As for Pillar 1, the assessment of the legal and institutional framework is the assessment of such framework in force as of 30th of April 2024, excluding local government sphere. But again, as for Pillar 1, when main element of what is now the new Public Procurement Act 2024, we're changing some of the aspects related and potentially some of the assessment of the institutional framework. It has been noted in the annex to the report. And we have, of course, also had the opportunity to discuss and interview a number of stakeholders that could provide us not only with an assessment of the theory, but also a better understanding of procurement practices in South Africa. So for Pillar 2, the assessment found altogether 33 gaps and recommendation under that pillar. You can see all the details on the assessment in the report, but I wanted to share with you a few general findings and some of the main recommendations. Complementing the assessment made under Pillar 1, the assessment in Pillar 2 found that the large degree of autonomy which is conceded to organs of state creates a significant potential and risk for legal uncertainty and differences in interpretation and application. And this, in fact, is further reinforced by the complexity of the existing normative environment. The second main findings is about the data ecosystem, in which the procurement system lacks a robust and integrated data ecosystem, which would not only reduce red tape, both for public and private entities, but also equally importantly, support both performance management and greater accountability. What has been found in the assessment of Pillar 2 is that there could be means to strengthen the attractiveness of competitive procurement in South Africa. And this is based on two main findings. The first one relates to the rules around ensuring the availability of funds before issuing competitive procurement procedures. National Treasury recently loosened the rules around the availability of funds, which deprives suppliers from budget certainty and might as a counter incentive to participate in competitive procurement processes. The second main issue and the second main finding relates to late payment of invoices, which seems to be, according to estimate, excessively widespread, but at the end of the day still remains completely unknown. But estimates suggest that it could be as high as 18.5% of the total amount of invoices which are not being paid on time. So in terms of recommendation, we do recommend that National Treasury reintroduce a formal obligation to ensure sufficient budget availability before issuing tenders or price quotation, and doing so being inspired by provision which exists for major capital projects. The second is about reinforcing oversight around payments within the prescribed timelines by collecting information on the total number and the amount of invoices processed by organs of state, and expanding reporting requirements to large players such as public entities. The second block of priority action relates to the development of stronger digital procurement ecosystem. The absence of vertical integration with other e-government systems and the very limited horizontal integration contribute to a very fragmented e-procurement landscape. And of course, here, the impact of the IFMS2 project would have a significant bearing. Also, we found that there has been extremely limited insight on procurement activities caused first and foremost by the very low compliance rate of organs of state with publication requirements. Only 12% of organs of state which are registered on intenders have uploaded their procurement plans for the financial year 23-24, while 73 organs of state have published tenders. Out of these 73%, only 3% of these institutions publish related contract notices. So here, in terms of recommendation, we would suggest to expand the coverage of the e-procurement system to cover not only competitive procurement procedures, but also exception and deviation, and to integrate with the internal financial management system reform, which is currently being undertaken. And we also suggest to identify organs of state with lowest adherence to publication obligation and work with them alongside to try to address this challenge. The last building block of priority action relates to the capacity of the procurement workforce, both in number and skills. because we found that the authoritative standing of the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer could only be addressed with addressing systemic human resources challenges. At the time of the assessment, out of the 140 approved positions for the office, only 80 positions were filled and 60 remained vacant, which showed a vacancy rate of 43%, 3 times the National Treasury's average. So the National Treasury will need to address this issue of vacancy rate in the OCPO to reinforce its authoritative standing and allow the office to carry out its mandate with the required human capacity. We also found that the professionalization of the broader SCM function across the country remained limited and principally lacked stewardship. The interim SCM Council, which has been created in 2018, has not been active since then. Further, training requirements, which exist for a number of public institutions, do not apply to entities listed in Schedule 2 and 3B of the PFMA, which cover large procuring institutions such as SOE. So we do suggest to reactivate the interim SCM Council so that a professionalization roadmap can be developed and implemented across the South African public procurement system. And we also recommend to develop dedicated training to SOC's supply chain management function. And now, with that, I will pass on the floor to Knut Leipold from the World Bank.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. Good afternoon to everyone. Now, MAPS Pillar 3 assesses how the procurement system operates in practice, which basically means how the organs of state address the market and how the market reacts in turn. So for this, we used 3 sources. First, we had a full data set from 166 contracts from 13 representative organs of state. The second source, we conducted a private sector survey and used the data from a total of 366 responses. And third, we interviewed relevant stakeholders as the assessment team for the other pillars did. And those stakeholders included the 13 organs of state. And these interviews helped clarify and further discuss how procurement operates in practice. Now, as you can see, in total, we identified 19 gaps out of 26 assessment criteria. And together with the recommendations as for the other pillars, these gaps are summarized in the report and more detailed in the assessment matrix. Regarding the overarching findings, we think that there is room for improving the first phase and the last phase of the procurement cycle, which are procurement planning and contract management. I think we all can agree that these 2 phases were underestimated in the past, but they are equally, if not more important than the execution phase in between. In addition, we found that transparency and stakeholder engagement are 2 important areas which should be improved throughout the procurement process. So in general, we think that optimizing procurement dialogue and capacity building among all stakeholders will enhance public procurement, and this is in the interest of fulfilling the broader policy objectives. So proposed priority actions in terms of public procurement practices. Here we noted that the procurement planning generally aims at clear requirements, which are in line with national sustainability objectives. However, these sustainability objectives are typically of socio-economic nature. And therefore, we suggest also the consideration of environmental aspects by promoting green public procurement. We think that green public procurement is an essential element of sustainable procurement And unfortunately, we could not find this in the sample contracts. In fact, you can build on good examples from your own country. The Western Cape government has done a lot when it comes to sustainable procurement, and this, of course, includes green procurement. Communication with economic operators should also be strengthened, and this can be done, for example, by promoting market research and consultations with the private sector, specifically in the preparation phase of the procurement processes, the procurement approaches and strategies. And what we find oftentimes, and this is not only in South Africa, this is also in many other countries, is that public procurement officials are hesitant to contact private firms prior to the procurement process, or they even think that they are not allowed to do so. For the selection and contracting phase, we found that procurement documents are not always clear and accessible to the bidders. And we think, as we could already hear by Mathieu, that the introduction of e-procurement will help a lot address several issues, and among others, this issue by providing procurement documents and information in standardized and machine-readable format. Also, we found that the use of functionality scores can contribute to achieving better value for money and increasing the responsiveness rate. And again, e-procurement provides security features which can ensure confidentiality and appropriate control and monitoring mechanisms. And the participation of stakeholders, of course, can boost transparency and access to public procurement information. Regarding contract management, we identified gaps, delays, and also disconnects between the procurement and the project management functions. And unfortunately, this was substantiated by the limited availability of data. So here we recommend better monitoring and control and include internal and external stakeholder engagement in this to help improve oversight and accountability throughout the process. And lastly, the public procurement market. Again, we found that insufficient communication with the private sector and lack of dedicated capacity building programs are quite an issue. And we think that this can be improved by proactively reaching out and communicating with the private sector and all the other stakeholders. We think they are really an important source for providing feedback and also constructive ideas the way forward regarding the procurement framework. The existing centralized supplier database is a great tool, and it's also a very important cornerstone for the further development of e-procurement and moving public procurement online. And together with specialized capacity development programs and improved stakeholder engagement, it really can address systemic issues and improve transparency and stimulate the procurement market. And finally, concerning sector strategies, we think that critical sectors, including specific procurement arrangements, are recognized by the government, which is good. And we identified a few challenges with regard to centralized procurement entities. And here we recommend to enhance oversight and risk management skills and techniques and provide better guidance for setting up and managing those transversal contracts. This was the summary of the findings and recommendations of Pillar 3. And with that, I would like to hand over to Constanza for Pillar 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Knut. Let me move to the main findings and recommendations of Pillar 4. And just to start, in terms of coverage, the assessment under Pillar 4 covers the legal and practical functioning of integrity-related aspects of public procurement. So we're looking at civil society and transparency, audit and control, the overall anti-corruption framework, and the appeals mechanism. As with the other pillars, the legal framework is of the period during the assessment, and in the annex, we have noted to what extent the new Public Procurement Act addresses some of the findings, and have commented on that in the annex where relevant. Again, the findings are based on legal text and documentations, regulations, etc., but also, of course, discussions and interviews with relevant stakeholders, as well as some relevant data and indicators that come from the private sector survey. With this, let me move into the details of the main findings. And again, today we'd like to focus on three overarching aspects, but the report gives more details about the assessments, with 30 gaps identified and recommendations explained in greater details. But so at a higher level, the assessment finds that accountability and integrity are undermined by systemic weaknesses in the control and audit system, and I will speak about that in more detail in a moment. Also, the public procurement system is highly vulnerable to corruption due to an inadequate anti-corruption framework that lacks a single body with primary responsibility for preventing corruption, as well as overall weakened law enforcement. And finally, we'd like to highlight the role of civil society in providing effective oversight. And this is limited by some shortcomings in transparency that we've heard about also in some of the other pillars. So in terms of the framework for audit and control, so the weaknesses that we have identified cover several different aspects, and one in particular looks at the lack of enforcement of audit recommendations, and this is referred to consequent management. Also, the weak capacity of internal control and audit, high levels of irregular expenditure. And the weak control environment includes ineffective reporting to management, again, lack of implementation of recommendation, and overall lack of integration of a financial management system that we've heard about also from Pillar 2, which further exacerbate the challenges for effective reporting and gathering of data. Also, the growing irregular expenditure has been documented, and here stakeholders in the system often perceive the external audit function as, let's say, punitive towards minor irregularities, but then again, not sufficient in addressing substantive issues. So this is the overall picture that is depicted in the assessment. And to address these aspects, we're looking at, as a starting point and aligned with some other findings in the assessment, a simplification of the SEM regulatory framework. So this would reduce the risk of administrative non-compliance with procurement rules. So in other words, help to lower irregular expenditure where it is about administrative non-compliance. At the same time, an important element to really strengthen the framework for control and audit is to build on capacity building measures and ensure that adequate qualifications and skills and capacity is available for accounting officers and accounting authorities, which are the main pillars in the systems. And so focus on their capacity, and also considering areas in which their discretionary powers may not be beneficial, and having standardized and simplified rules may provide an overall more streamlined system, for instance, on rules for procurement by other means. And in a similar vein, supporting the capacity building should focus on the harmonization of internal audit and control practices. And here, digital systems would further support this effort, reduce the margin for human error, and improve the quality of data and ensure that records are available for audit purposes. Moving on to another, let's say, key aspect under Pillar 4 is looking at the overall anti-corruption system. As mentioned, some weaknesses include limitations that are produced by a multi-agency system, meaning that to date, there's no single anti-corruption agency in South Africa, but the mandate is spread across multiple institutions. And also during the state capture years, there's been a hollowing out of the state law enforcement capacity, law enforcement agencies, which has led to loss of skills and capacity that hasn't been fully recovered. So in this sense, the recommendation is to build on a strong, independent, and capable anti-corruption body, which would increase the clarity in roles and responsibility and around corruption prevention and detection. Another key aspect that is more concretely linked to public procurement is about the finding is about the limited effectiveness in detective and preventing corruption risks. Again, several aspects are contributing to these findings, including the weakened the internal control and limited transparency that I've mentioned, which it's also including lack of data analytics, for instance, for the identification of red flags. And so in this respect, the recommendation aims at supporting and providing support, tools, and guidances to accounting officers and accounting authorities, in particular in their risk management process, and focus particularly on the sectors that are vulnerable to corruption. And as a third proposed priority action is to focus on empowering civil society in conducting procurement oversight. So overall, we've found that civil society is quite engaged in public procurement. They've been involved in the consultation process around the public procurement bill. They're active, yet lack of transparency is a barrier for conducting their oversight rules. And transparency is not only about data around procurement transactions that we've heard about, but also includes, for instance, having overview of various SEM policies of South African departments. So here the recommendation is ensuring that public procurement data is comprehensive, accessible, and available in a usable format, but also expand transparency to cover regulatory aspects of the procurement regime, such as SEM policies. Also, as I mentioned, civil society is actively engaged in consultations, but let's say areas of improvement could be also include in the scope of consultation secondary legislation, which defines significant aspects of the public procurement system, as well as strengthening the feedback loop for input that has been provided during the consultation process. And a final point is to to strengthen the role of civil society is to allow for opportunities for direct engagement, which are currently limited by the legal framework. So this could be to introduce mechanisms for civil society to really participate in a procurement transaction and provide oversight, such as schemes that have been piloted in other countries, social witnesses and integrity pacts that give this role to civil society. So these were the main aspects under Pillar 4, and I'd like to head back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costanza. I think this was really, of course, when you think about an exercise like these institutions, along with our South African government, did for South Africa, it's a very in-depth analysis. We are only capturing here, and what you have mentioned captures only the key findings. But of course, I would invite everybody here to go and read the full assessment that is published on the MAPS website. Also, for those of you who might have connected a bit later when we started, please remember that this webinar is being recorded and that you may formulate any questions using the Q&A function of Zoom. I see that we already have a couple of questions, so I invite everybody to formulate your questions either for the assessing teams or for the National Treasury, and we will have a space at the end to take those. So with that, as we have heard findings and recommendations, we will now ask Ms. Mendo Ntshwalana, Chief Procurement Officer at the National Treasury in South Africa, to provide us an overview from the South African government about the way forward and how you will use this assessment and what projects you have in mind using this information. So with that, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. The next slide. I think I'm really honored to address you today on the assessment of South Africa's national procurement system for 2024. The comprehensive evaluation has been a collaborative effort, and I'm pleased that the development partners share the key findings with us. I'm also in that space wanting to acknowledge National Treasury, the Office of the DG, and the officials in the OCPO for their dedication and hard work throughout this process, and to the various stakeholders that participated in the assessment. I think in terms of the key findings and the recommendations, as the National Treasury team, we have assessed the findings, the gaps, and the recommendations. Sorry. And we do note that the assessment, it really identified significant strengths in our procurement system, such as a robust legal framework. It has also highlighted critical gaps and areas for improvement, which includes a fragmented legal framework, limited transparency, weak governance, and insufficient digitalization. To address these gaps, as the National Treasury, we're developing a comprehensive action plan which will focus on several key areas. And the following slides, the slides that will follow, will cover some of those areas. If we look at the legal framework, the recent publication of the Public Procurement Act and the drafting of its regulations that we're busy with at the moment will already address many of the gaps that we have identified. And what we've tried to do in terms of the right side, we're sort of saying other areas that the Act and regulations will address will include the following issues. But if I just concentrate on the legal framework, I would sort of say the very first of these gaps is really the consolidation of the various legislative instruments into a single primary legislative framework, which would reduce the complexity that we're talking about, and also the fragmentation. It will further, further apply to all procurement activities by all procuring institutions, promoting uniformity and standardization. If you look at the right side, sort of saying there would be areas in the Act and the regulations which will include the establishment of the PPO. And if you look at the establishment of the PPO with the authority to maintain the legal framework, that's what we have already said in terms of the Public Procurement Act that is there. We're busy now with the regulations. The second part would be the provisions for procurement through donor or grant funding. Those that they will be there. The third part will be the introduction of clear legislative provisions for procurement methods and minimum timeframes. I think in terms of the procurement methods, we have moved quite a bit and produced certain papers around that, so that we can engage the public around those. And we're also working with the National Research Foundation, which is also able to put us in a platform with both including the private sector. The other area that the regulations will include will be the automatic exclusion of certain office holders and bulk suppliers. We'll establish a process for reconsideration and review of procurement decision by a new public procurement tribunal. And these areas, once more, are areas that are already in the Act. So we are bound to have the regulations in that respect. The development and implementation of ICT-based procurement systems. Yes, we have spoken around the issues that relate to ICT, but we also wanted to enhance the current systems that we've got. The provisions to advance sustainable public procurement. We have got some papers around the sustainable public procurement that we are trying to get to the public to also put in some inputs around that. Provisions for public access to procurement information with some discretionary restrictions by the minister, specifies offences related to public procurement and provides for the investigation of non-compliance and offences by the PPO. Many other operational and process issues that we'll be looking at. So we're trying to sort of say some of the issues that are a challenge within the legal framework. We've just lifted them up to sort of say, this is what we'll be able to do moving forward. The next slide relates to the transparency. And we have many indicators that highlighted the shortcomings in transparency in various areas. The limited transparency in the outcome of court rulings, no central publication platform, the limited and unreliable procurement stats, resulting in a limited scope of published data, low compliance by procuring institutions to public procurement information, persistent transparency issues, and insufficient supply development highlight critical gaps in stakeholder inclusivity. I'm quite passionate on that one because we have been really sort of saying we do need to be involved in those programs and projects that will involve both the private sector and also the public sector in stakeholder inclusivity. Weaknesses in contract execution, including the frequent delays and limited information transparency, underscore the urgency for better contract delivery and stakeholder engagement thereof. Issues with confidentiality and transparency in the evaluation process, limited transparency for effective monitoring by civil society. The actions that we more or less would wish to embark upon would be to expand and improve the transparency portal of procurement data and information, and that is already in progress. We are also working with that with some of the partners, so that we could ensure comprehensive access to procurement data in a machine-readable format, mandate access to procurement information, of all organs of state, implement mechanisms for direct civil society participation and oversight, investigate the most appropriate platform for court rulings and tribunal outcomes. The one thing that is quite important is the fact that, yes, we have started now with the municipalities because we do have institutions who have started, and we are also trying to embark on the issues that relate to the SOEs and SOCs in that regard. And we are working as a collective in Treasury. It's not only driven by us. We are working with the ALM and other divisions around that. Thank you. As we know, many indicators they really highlighted the shortcomings in procurement operations, which comes from the current fragmented and complex legal framework, where there's poor procurement planning. And if then there's poor procurement planning, it's always a challenge to think that we'll be able to have procurement going correctly in that regard. Poor contract management and execution, limited market engagement and dialogue with suppliers, which we are sort of saying as part of this limited market engagement. The issues that relate to strategic sourcing have been very big in this current financial year, to interact with the institutions, to assist them in the strategic sourcing so that we can be able to interact with the private sector in some of these issues well before we issue out the tenders. But the actions that we also talk about, the Act, it does make provision for the minister to prescribe a framework within which procurement institutions must develop and implement the procurement system. The gaps identified, they would be addressed in the regulations. The engagement strategy with private sector and civil society need to enhance internal control and audit. Would note that in terms of these regulations, they're going to follow the same process as what we had when we were dealing with the Act. They are going to be, we are consulting with the private sector and everybody else. Because when we go to, they are still going to go to Parliament. When we go to Parliament, we must have finalized that engagement with all relevant stakeholders. So the same process that we dealt with when we were dealing with the Act, it's the one that we are going to, that is to be followed in terms of this piece of legislation. The next part in terms of the yes, the next part when we deal with the digitalization, we noticed that some indicators that have been highlighted do have shortcomings, especially the issues that relate to e-procurement that have been well ventilated. And we note that the absence of vertical integration with other e-government systems and minimal horizontal integration contribute to a very fragmented e-procurement landscape. And these significant shortcomings in the implementation and use of e-procurement systems in South Africa. Insufficient data for analysis due to fragmented e-procurement systems and low compliance with publication requirements does limit meaningful analysis on trends, participation, efficiency, and compliance. The action that we're taking, we also are saying in terms of this Public Procurement Act, it does support the development and implementation of ICT-based procurement systems, the overhaul of the digital environment of the procurement system, and the enhancement of the use of open contracting data standards, which we have already started. It's in progress, and I think we are doing fairly well. We're going to also integrate the e-procurement systems with internal financial management systems, because we note that we do have our IFMS, and the IFMS we're trying to have some inroads there, and we'll see how best can we deal with that through those internal financial management systems. We're also going to investigate the reasons for low compliance by institutions not publishing procurement information, which then means that in terms of the issues that relate to procurement plan, it's always a challenge if we are able to have procurement plans, but in terms of the implementation of such, you're not able to see the same thing. So those are issues that we're going to deal with. As so far as it relates to professionalization and capacity building, I do note that there are some indicators that have highlighted the shortcomings in the professionalization and capacity building. There's limited professionalization of the supply chain management function, lack of stewardship for professionalization, limited coverage of capacity building programs. Once more, the Act does support the professional development and training of officials, and in that regard, we're going to develop and implement a professionalization roadmap for the supply chain management function, which is already in progress, and we are assisted also in that regard. We're going to leverage on the work that had already been done by the Interim Supply Chain Management Council, and we'll be conducting a capacity assessment and devise a tailored training action plan. And we're of the view that the issue of professionalization is quite important. And with the assistance of some international partners, we are hopeful that this project is on the right trajectory. The next action plan relates to the anti-corruption and integrity. Some indicators highlighted the shortcomings in combating corruption. The anti-corruption system is inadequate to face the challenges it is confronted with. South Africa lacks a single body with the primary responsibility of preventing corruption. It is governed by a fragmented multi-agency approach, which proved ineffective during the state capture years. Severe weaknesses in prosecution and whistleblower, but the actions that were putting ahead, sort of saying the combating of corruption in the country is not limited to procurement only, and it's therefore elevated to relevant authorities to address, which would contribute towards a strong, independent anti-corruption body, and also contribute to an anti-corruption framework strategy, which would contribute towards strengthening whistleblower protection and anonymity of disclosures. I think we had, when we were dealing with the Act, we had quite a robust discussions around the issue of whistleblower protection. So we're sort of saying we are looking into that. Introduce measures in the procurement system for early detection of fraud and corruption in terms of the red flags. As the way forward, we're sort of saying we really need to institute a monitoring and evaluation mechanism to track progress on implementation of the action plan. So it's no use for us to be sort of saying these are the things that we do, but we'd wish to also put some timelines and also try and get other partners within the procurement family, not necessarily us alone. Because we know that when we started this process, we had various stakeholders. So we're sort of saying we need to have an action plan in that regard that would be all encompassing. As already said, this action plan will really require coordinated efforts and strategic reforms. We are committed to working closely with all stakeholders to achieve a more transparent, accountable, and efficient procurement system. By addressing these gaps, we aim to support sustainable development and economic growth in South Africa. We find that when you look at the SOEs, SOCs, we do have working arrangements, especially with Transnet and also Eskom. But one is also looking at how do we broaden the institutions that will be working with. And one thing that is good with the work that we're doing with especially with Transnet, it is managed at the level of where we are working rather than managed. We are working in collaboration with the presidency. So some of the niggling issues in Transnet, we've been able to deal with them. And some of the niggling issues in Eskom, we're able to deal with them precisely because we are addressing those gaps as a collective rather than in assembly. So we're of the view that as, in conclusion, we do want to reiterate our gratitude to yourselves as our development partners, OECD, World Bank, and African Development Bank, and all stakeholders that were involved in this assessment. And we're sort of saying together we can build a stronger, more resilient procurement system that benefits all South Africans. And thank you for your attention and continued support. We look forward to your continued partnership as we move forward with our action plan. And I think in terms of the action plan, perhaps we do need to, at some point in time, to sort of say what are the key deliverables and with timeframes that we'll be dealing with as we are working with our partners, as institutions, partners, as institutions that were involved in the whole process. And thank you.
Thank you very much to the Chief Procurement Officer of the National Treasury in South Africa for that presentation of what are you intending to do with the MAPS assessment. And I think that speaks to the value of an assessment such as this one. We believe that the value of MAPS is really after having such an in-depth assessment of a country, it is all about how it will be used towards reform. So it is encouraging to notice that you have thought that through, and throughout the months and years to come, it is also encouraging to hear that several international partners and local stakeholders will also support the work that you are envisaging. So as discussed right now, we would want to move to a questions and answers session following these presentations. Was saying that I invite you all to read the assessment at that is published on the MAPS website, mapsinitiative.org/assessments. And I would want first to start with questions that relate to the legal aspect. So I see a couple of questions here. I think maybe if you could elaborate a bit, and I don't know if that's first Amilcar, but the rest, please feel free to jump in as needed. On the time frame of the assessment and how you went about the new Public Procurement Act, and whether that is already addressing some of those concerns raised. Point number one on the timing, and also on the focus of that act and what you found. We have here a question on whether that is more focused on Black economic empowerment, or how much does that really address some of these key operational and integrity concerns raised in the report. So Amilcar, if you want to give it a go first.
Thank you, Nicholas. I think I will first address the issue related to what are the provisions. I think the question is to provide more details or examples on the provisions, on the recommendations that were already addressed by the Act. First issue on the consolidation of provisions. The Act brings together provisions from various instruments into a single piece of legislation. That is one of the issues, one of the recommendations that was addressed, and that relates, of course, to uniformity and standardization. That emphasized the uniformity and the standardization procurement process and procedures. Other issues that we have noted that were already addressed, the clarity on the applicability of international fundings. It's clear that the Act applies to the international funding. Before that was not clear, but provides a room for the minister to grant an exemption to the procurement authority to use the let's say the rules of the international organizations. The issue of the Public Procurement Tribunal, I think it's very important because it provides an avenue for independent review of procurement decisions, including the review of the decisions on debarment. I think one of the recommendations was the clarity on the issue of the debarment and to reduce the bias. The Public Procurement Tribunal will have the last saying in terms of the appeal by the bidders for a review of the debarment provisions. And also the Act itself provides clear process and right to review of the department positions, provision decisions, I mean. The e-procurement, I think also the Chief Procurement Officer alluded to that. It's clear stated on the act the importance of the e-procurement and the issue about sustainable procurement. I think although the provisions are very limited, and that's why we also have a recommendation on the MAPS assessment to develop a policy or strategy on sustainable procurement. I think it also answers the question on the Black empowerment. There are also a lot of provisions concerning the integrity. I think that was the second question. It includes the establishing the Public Procurement Office with also authority to investigate. The protection of officials that refuse to comply with unlawful instructions related to procurement. The transparency and access to information is better clarified, including the protection of sensitive information. Also, introduce the code of conduct that is mandatory for all officials involved in public procurement and the declaration of interest. I think those are some examples of provisions that were already incorporated in the Act. Of course, there are some issues that can be resolved through the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Amilcar. Now let's move to Pillar 2. There is a question related to the institutional arrangement, and it is about whether an independent public procurement regulatory authority would be an important addition. If you have any comments, and actually this person also asks for whether you have seen like useful approaches from the work that you have done in other countries. So I think, Mathieu, if you could take that question.
Sure. Thank you, Nicolas. And thank you, Barbara, for the question. Well, it's the overall institutional design of procurement system could take many different forms, including indeed separating some of the functions which are currently carried out and assumed by the OCPO. First of all, as a point of clarification, according to the MAPS methodology, of course, we assessed the existing arrangement and the effectiveness of these existing institutional arrangements. So we did not look into investigating alternative institutional settings. The main point here, I think, to try to still provide an answer is not so much on the distribution of tasks across the procurement system. There are several countries across OECD membership, but also beyond, that indeed separate the regulation function from other function being carried out by OCPO. That is the case, for example, in Portugal, but there are also a number of different countries. Some other countries are grouping all these tasks within one institution. The case, for example, of us here, and what the assessment stresses, in fact. First of all, it discusses also the creation of the new institution with the 2024 Public Procurement Act. But second, more importantly, is that this institution, whatever its mandate, needs to possess adequate resources, both human resources, but also technological resources. And those are the two elements that also were highlighted by National Treasury when they shared progress made and thinking around the implementation of the action plan. Those are two critical tasks, and irrespective of the institutional setting, ensuring that the institutions benefit from adequate resources is certainly central to their effectiveness.
Thank you, Mathieu. We have also a question now related to Pillar 4, and it relates to those risks, those corruption risks and risks of wrongdoing that were identified, and how some of these might be tackled through regulatory changes, but then furthermore, whether there's also a need to change some of those social norms which of course are not easy to change. But Constanza, I don't know if you could elaborate a bit on those measures that might go beyond regulation in what you studied of Pillar 4.
Yes, thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Barbara, for the question. I think it raises really a valid point, but you also mentioned the complexity of this aspect. I think an example, or what I would say as a reply, is that there's still gaps in terms of the regulatory system, and if I can mention, for instance, the example of whistleblowing. Of course, there's a cultural element to whether people are inclined to blow the whistle in certain context and a social norm around it. But there's also the need for, the legal instruments and the protection, etc. So I think we're still, let's say, the assessment still raises a number of points where there are actions to be taken at the legal level. But I take the point that social norms are an important aspect to an overall change as well. And in terms of who would be best placed to address these social norms, of course, again, perhaps having one entity that is mostly responsible for the anti-corruption framework would give also this role to that entity. In the absence, I think that there's also a sort of question mark about which would be the entity best placed to tackle the sort of social norm aspects. So I hope this provides an answer.
Thank you so much, Constanza. Then I will try to group some questions that I see here, which I believe might be more directed to the National Treasury, related to the implementation of these recommendations. And let me start by the first one of the time frame for the implementation. Of course, you presented several actions. Some of these might be more for the shorter or medium term, and some beyond that. But if you could elaborate, please, on the time frame for implementing these actions, and related to that, I think there are a couple of questions on how you will do that in terms of the financing and the stakeholders that will be required for that. There's a question, for example, on the role of the private sector to providing assistance to that journey. So over to the National Treasury of South Africa.
Okay, thank you. My colleagues will come in, Estelle and others. I think in terms of the recommendations, we are to get back to the stakeholders, because you'd note that when we did this process, we're not alone as a treasury. We had stakeholders, be it departments, SOEs, SOCs. So we will do the same exercise that we're doing today in terms of sharing the report with them and the recommendations and what we have already sort of said we think would do. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to sit here in Treasury and sort of say, okay, this is what we are going to do, because we work in a partnership environment. I'm more looking at the public sector. In terms of those areas that need the private sector, I think we'll still invite the private sector as so far as it relates to certain recommendations. Otherwise, we are not going to deal with this alone. We are going to involve both the public and the private sector. The third issue would be the fact that in terms of the timeline, this is what we're trying to work on, precisely because we are currently involved with the regulations. And the regulations are going to, as I have already outlined, they're going to go that particular process. The fourth issue would be to sort of say, in terms of the timeline, perhaps Estelle and others could come, but what I foresee now, because there's a lot of work that we're dealing with in terms of regulations, we are more concentrating on that. But on the side, we can be looking at this in terms of getting whether it's some webinars through the SP, through the strategic sourcing unit, working with the policy and legal. It's just that in terms of the policy and legal, we might not be able to get that far because they are involved in many other issues. Otherwise, we are not going to sit in Treasury and sort of say, here are the recommendations. We're still going to work as a collective in terms of the recommendations. So sure as anything, we'll be able to come back to yourselves with our action plan that we would have consulted our stakeholders on, and then we'll take it from there. Okay.
Thank you.
This is Estelle speaking. I just wanted to add to what Mendo said, is that after this process today, we will develop a detailed action plan, which is basically indicator by indicator, and also identifying which stakeholders are involved, and have then work sessions with those specific stakeholders to unpack the recommendations. Prioritizing the recommendations will depend, I think, mostly on the regulations that must be prescribed. That would be the first priority. The second priority would be regulations that may be prescribed by the minister in terms of the drafting of our regulations. And then thirdly, it would depend on the complexity of the recommendations. Our initial assessment of the timeframes is that there are recommendations that can be implemented within 6 months, and then there are other recommendations which may take a little bit longer, and we were thinking about up to 36 months, but we will share a detailed action plan with timeframes, I think quite soon in the new year.
Thank you.
Okay.
Afternoon, colleagues. It's Petros from National Treasury, and also I think with what the colleagues are presenting, the colleagues will also realize that even the process for drafting the regulation itself, it's a joint effort between National Treasury and the organs of state use through the reference group. So we believe that some of the recommendations that are here are being outlined today will find place when we are developing or finalizing the regulations themselves. So I just wanted to supplement on that.
Thank you very much.
And I wanted just to...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's on another matter, because I wanted just to respond on the issue of the vacancy rate within the National Treasury and OCPO, where the assessment it's saying 43%. And I do want to assure the partners that one thing that the Office of the DG is working hard on is exactly at that point. Even in today's meeting, this is what we're dealing with. So the issue of the vacancy rate, and you'd note that if you have got these vacancies, it's not only the issue of the National Treasury, we have to get to other organs of state, which is the department, DPSA, for us to be looking into whether it's they're agreeing or not agreeing. But I must say now, things are moving, and I think the Office of the DG, on a weekly basis, they do get an update on that. So we are working tirelessly on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think that was a very complete answer related to the questions on the action plan. Just to mention that, of course, the assessment itself provides a lot of information related to how to prioritize, because it is also an assessment of the risks that each of the gaps pose to the system. And the assessing teams have included that, whether that's a low, medium, or high risk gap, and that enables the government to use that information to draft the action plan with that in mind. So let me go now again, maybe Constanza, those could be some for you, related to international examples of brought from other countries, particularly related to two topics. They ask here about the concept of irregular expenditure. And there's also another question about other countries, maybe good examples that you have seen. I think Matthew already mentioned some, but I guess it's related to what other elements have you seen that that might be interesting related to the gaps mentioned, and particularly this one on irregular expenditure.
So just as a answer to the question about irregular expenditure and whether that's unique to South Africa. So no, the concept itself of irregular expenditure, of course, this is the detailed definitions are included in the report, but it signifies an identified non-compliance with some rules of the system, and it can be minor rules that are more formal in nature, but it can also be issues that are more substantive. And so this is not unique to South Africa. Maybe just to expand a little bit what South Africa has introduced, because some of the audit recommendations were not followed up on, is a process of material irregularities, and these are irregularities that are considered more substantive and that have more implication in terms of financial losses to the state. And here there's a heightened follow-up from the Auditor General when these kinds of irregularities have been identified. So this may be a more, let's say, feature of South Africa that may not be in other countries to the same extent. So yeah, this is and Nicholas, was there another part of the question that I haven't answered to?
No, I think you answered completely to those questions. And I see the last question that I have here is on the Procurement Act, and it relates to the regulation. So it says particularly when the new Procurement Act is planned to be effective, as the readiness of procurement regulations may take a while. So for that one, if any of you could mention what you see related to the act and the time it will take for regulations. And of course, I believe that is a bit included in what you were mentioning from the National Treasury in your action plan. But if you could elaborate on that, on the readiness while the regulations are drafted and published.
Okay, the act, as you would know, has already been assented to, but it's not effective yet. It's not in action yet because we are waiting for the regulations to be drafted. There is a section in the Public Procurement Act, if I'm not mistaken, section 69, that talks to the regulations, or sorry, it's 24 months for the Public Procurement Act to be reviewed, and also for the regulations to be finalized. So I think with regards to a project plan on the regulations, we are targeting the beginning of next financial year to send it through to Parliament.
Maybe let me also make this point. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Bultumelo Mashilo. I am in the office of the DG responsible for coordinating the entire MAPS assessment process. I just want to make 2 or 3 points. The first one is that the National Treasury has issued a media statement on its website, and what the statement talks to is the fact that we are committed to taking the recommendations from this assessment forward in a particular manner. And some of the questions which are being asked on the chat, I suppose, can be answered from the media statement that has been issued. And I also want to assure people that to the extent that by the end of this session, if we have not addressed all the questions that you may have, please send us an email at cpo@treasury.gov.za. Send us a question related to the MAPS assessment to that email address, and we will respond to you. And for colleagues that are coming from the media, you may also contact us at media@treasury.gov.za. In fact, I think on the media side, we had made an undertaking that once the colleagues that are in attendance have gone through the assessment report, we will make ourselves available to take some interviews, just so that we can properly outline to them how we are going to take the recommendations forward. And lastly, it's to really make this point that public procurement reform is an ongoing process. So while MAPS is giving us an opportunity to reflect on some of the weaknesses, but also on what works, we will be taking these recommendations forward as part of our ongoing efforts to really improve and strengthen our procurement regulations, and our procurement system, and we will do this similar to how the report was done, working within government and outside of government, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to make those few points for colleagues that may have questions around how we will take the recommendations forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I come in? I think
Yes,
I'm covered, but I just wanted to say something around us getting to Parliament on the issue of regulations. To sort of say we were hoping to be there by the end of the financial year, that is more or less 31st of March. But what usually happens, and what we've seen in terms of when we're during the stage of taking this to an end, there were some delays with the parliamentary process. But as my colleague has already said, the issue, we wanted to align ourselves with what is in the Act in terms of Section 68, that within 24 months after this Act is first published as an Act, and the President review the implementation of this Act and the need for amendments to this Act. And then it has got other time frames within 27 months after this Act is first published as an Act. We made public a report on the review and submit it to Parliament. So I'm of the view that parts of some of the issues that are here now in the Act, they will be very much dependent, many of them, on us finalizing the issue of regulations. And I think the team is already involved in that. It's just that the dependency, whilst we have got these sections that I've quoted, the dependence is also through the parliamentary process, which sometimes it can be fast. So we are hopeful that we'll be able to meet that time. The other issue that I wanted to talk to once more is the fact that in terms of the recommendations, yes, we'll go as we go to the recommendations. You'll find that some of the issues that are mentioned in the recommendations are already issues that are also in the Act. They might not have been fleshed out as they could have been in the regulations. So that is also something that we're trying to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe, of course, and with it's right to do so, that the Act itself is a major undertaking and a very important step. Of course, I think some of the questions and from the presentations I believe that there's also like non-legislative aspects to bear in mind. So I would maybe ask, because it strikes me, of course, the topic of professionalization and how that can be a very relevant element from what you discussed, and I think that was also mentioned by Mathieu. But if you could maybe, Mathieu, elaborate a bit on that, how you see that role of professionalization within this reform context, and how that can be useful going forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicolas, for asking the question. Yeah, I mean, professionalization is certainly key, because behind every law, behind every regulation, you have women and men that are supposed to effectively implement them. And we do see that in many countries, in many different contexts, effective reforms require a two-pronged approach. One being revising the overall regulatory institutional framework, but the other one being upskilling the procurement function. And when I'm even referring to the procurement function, it also goes beyond procurement professionals, so supply chain management professionals, but really people that are involved in the overall public procurement ecosystem. Because without capability, you cannot undertake more complex, more far-reaching impact that public procurement can, or is meant, public procurement reforms are meant to achieve. So we have seen in many different countries from around the globe that really professionalization was central to any effective reforms in the public procurement system. And the OECD, and I believe all the assessment partners, would be more than happy to support South Africa in moving this agenda forward and developing an effective professionalization strategy.
Thank you, Mathieu. And of course, just to remind everybody here that in addition to the main MAPS, which was applied in South Africa, there are a number of supplementary modules, including one on professionalization, which can be applied regardless of whether the country has already completed a full MAPS assessment. So that can also be something to consider in the coming years. We have a couple of questions about the general experience in various countries, implementing recommendations, follow-up process, and also how this can be discussed in the Pan-African context. So I think the African Development Bank and Amilcar might be in the best position to speak about this, and of course the other institutions are invited to do so.
Okay, thank you, Nicolas. I think in terms of the implementation of recommendation of the MAPS, and that the MAPS is not just a study to be sure. We have good experiences in the region, including, for instance, Mauritius, where they started implementing some of the recommendations, even during the assessment on some specific revisions to the legal framework. But also they went ahead and they implemented the e-procurement assessment, which was one of the recommendations of the assessment, and they're interested in following up the overall review of the legal and regulatory frameworks. Also, Angola, they have started implementing some of the recommendations, namely on the professionalization and also the e-procurement and the sustainable procurement. So I think we have seen also an appetite by other countries like Eswatini and so on and Namibia to implement soon the recommendations of the MAPS assessments, as we are seeing also with South Africa. So I think it is a good tool in the sense that countries are using to inform their procurement reforms. On the trends in terms of the recommendations across this region, the three main issues that we have noted are the e-procurement, the professionalization, and the sustainable procurement. Those are the main aspects in terms of recommendations of the MAPS assessment, where the African Development Bank has been involved in the past years. Thank you.
Thank you, Amilcar. And I can only echo what you mentioned in terms of the impact of MAPS that we have seen not only in Africa but across the world. And this is much. This goes beyond the like legal changes. Of course, MAPS is an important document when you want to base any legal or institutional reform. But furthermore, we see the value in many countries in terms of having a document which is recognized internationally, but also that has served throughout a multi-stakeholder process within the country to identify and to agree on what is really the most important going forward for the country. So I think it is very valuable, and how we've seen this take shape again, both in legal reforms across the world, but also in particular elements that you can afterwards start to do projects on various topics such as SPP, such as e-procurement, etc. There's a question related to the Sustainable Development Goals and why they are not included in the report, but just maybe I can answer that one. MAPS was updated in a process between 2015 and 2018, and the new version of MAPS is completely aligned with the SDGs. In particular, there are elements that are brought here, such as sustainable public procurement related to target 12.7 of the SDGs, which are already included in the methodology. So when applying that methodology, that is completely aligned with the SDGs. And then there's a question, I think, on I think it's a very detailed question on and actually like a suggestion on the publication of standard approaches in the application of Chapter 4. I think I would stress what was said by the South African authorities in terms of what is left to be done after this assessment has been presented. I think there will be a lot of questions and very specific ones. So I think the best would be to take them in further events, meetings, and also through the email that was shared by them, so that this can be channeled correctly and answered in due course. And I think that's also something that we can think about going forward. We mentioned for the last question about the possibility of deepening the understanding of other topics, e-procurement, sustainable public procurement, professionalization, with the help of partners. So just I'm being mindful of the time allocated for this event. So I would like to invite any of the speakers, and I see Knut's hand raised. So if you would want to add anything else right now to what has been said, please go ahead, Knut.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for this great event. I would like to stress out again what we just said and where the questions were asking for, those three elements that also Amilcar pointed out. And let me repeat it, even if we don't have much time: e-procurement, professionalization, and sustainable procurement. And I'm saying that because you may also have heard of the African Public Procurement Network, which was founded a few years ago with an annual General Assembly, which just took place in Rwanda. And this is a wonderful platform and opportunity to discuss these topics, to learn from each other what's going on in the countries. And it so happens that there are 3 focal groups in the planning to be developed under the auspice and umbrella of this African Public Procurement Network. And those focus groups are exactly on those 3 topics. The last comment I would like to make from our end is on professionalization. I think Rio mentioned it in his comment. It's a very important topic, if not the most important topic. It touches on all other areas, but we also need to manage the expectations. Professionalization will not result in immediate low-hanging fruits. It's a long process in order to gain something out of it, but it needs to be started immediately. And I think here OCPO is on the right track, and the development partners will be available to support this development. That's it, what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Knut. I completely echo your words related to the role of the African Public Procurement Network. I know South Africa is very active in the network, and I find that there are many elements that can be shared in terms of how this assessment was done. but also the implementation of the recommendations and to share knowledge of countries that have already undergone the assessment, have already started to implement, but also the other way around. I think knowing and understanding what has gone well and also the challenges is something that countries would be, it would be useful for countries. And I know that partners in this call and also myself and the MAP Secretariat, we will be happy to continue supporting that conversation and to continuing being part of that conversation going forward across Africa. So I don't know if there's anything else to add from any of our partners. Please raise your hand. And if not, I think this has been a very fruitful event. Again, just to reiterate that the assessment, the full assessment is now published and may be accessible through the link that you see there, mapsinitiative.org/assessments. You can see, of course, of the rest of the countries, but also the most recent one, South Africa, which has been published today. And please follow us on LinkedIn for more updates on maps. Going forward, we will have more events, particularly from the African region on the first week of December. So we hope to keep this conversation along with the partners. And again, congratulations to this great effort from the South African authorities along with international organizations to create and draft this assessment and propose an action plan based on it. Thank you very much to you all. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.